further in depth, and we bring in former official in the U.S. Trade Representative's office, Steve Gill, on this. Steve, you've been following the story even from December, before even many people here in the United States were following, going, there's going to be an economic impact, regardless if this virus ever hits the United States. It's here now. Now, over in Asia, they say that the COVID-19 decay, the new cases are de-escalating. But are they people starting to go back to work in these factories where these supply chains have been disrupted in the past?
Well, you saw major factories get shut down. You saw major trade shows that were taking place or scheduled to take place in China get canceled. So it did cause a disruption that we're already starting to feel. You are getting some indications from China that they're starting to reopen some of the factories. But again, I would take that with a little bit of a grain of salt until we really see the flow of goods starting to come back out of China. As you mentioned, we talked during the trade battle between the U.S. and China that companies were starting to decouple the U.S. and China connection and move their factories to Indonesia, to Philippines, to Vietnam, and other places. That had already begun, and I think you're going to see that happen even more quickly now as American companies and American consumers are realizing that about 80% of our drugs come from China. I think people are going to be even more focused on how we can make sure that we're making more things here in the United States or have alternate sources in other countries if we get into a situation like this in the future.
But that's the thing, Steve. I'm a little disappointed. Do you think that we were actually adequately prepared for this kind of disruption in a supply chain? It's one thing to have the entire product made in one country, but we are obviously a small world after all. And in this case, don't you think the businesses should have had better plans in case something like this, whether you were talking about a natural disaster or a virus or something was to hit as it has various continents around the world? Should they have been better prepared?
Absolutely. And I think that, if you go to first-year class of business school, they're going to be telling you, as a business, you don't want to be solely dependent upon one client, one customer, because you're putting literally all your eggs in one basket. And I think that we really weren't paying enough attention as kind of a business market, as businesses, on how dependent we were on Chinese products, whether it's in our cell phones, whether it's in Walmart, the T-shirts, the pharmaceutical industry. We had become so dependent because we were chasing the cheap prices that we ignored business reality. And I think if nothing else good comes from this coronavirus thing, it is that we've had a wake-up call that we've got to be more diverse in where we're sourcing our materials, our agriculture products, and everything else other than any one country, whether it's China or someone else.
So here at home, do you think, besides the actual effect of can't find toilet paper or hand sanitizer anywhere, are we really feeling the disruption of the bigger supply chain here in America, or do we not even know yet? And how long is that effect going to be felt?
Well, for example, South Korea has been shutting down a lot of their manufacturing, which means that your Android phones, other products that we generate from there are also part of the supply chain disruption that we're seeing. There was a story today that those N95 masks that you're seeing everyone wear in these other countries and increasingly in the country, most of those have been produced by China in the past. There are manufacturing companies that are ramping up and quickly producing those masks, but we're being told there's going to be a global shortage of those because ramping up takes some time and the demand is exceeding the ability to produce it. So we're going to see kind of the stops and starts of this supply chain disruption, not just with respect to China, but other countries that are also being affected as we move ahead. I mean, you've got the entire country of Italy that's now been put under quarantine. I'm not sure how much trade the U.S. does with Italy, but whatever it is going to come to a grinding halt.
Well, luckily we've brought the pizza and spaghetti here, so we don't have to worry about a shortage of that. Before I let you go, I want to talk about, obviously, about what the U.S. government is doing to help those affected by the coronavirus, like the payroll tax. Now, I agree that we need to help businesses out in this situation, but I do hear some arguments going, wait a minute, what's the difference between this and 2 weeks of people being in quarantine as compared to 2 weeks of being at home with the flu where there's no help that comes from the government? Could this be setting a bad standard going forward or opening up Pandora's box of the government taking in and saying, we're going to even be involved more in your business by saying you need to cover somebody for 2 to 4 weeks, even if it's not the coronavirus, but for any virus?
Well, again, when you look at the numbers, the regular flu affects far more people, has caused 18 to 20 to 50,000 deaths, and we haven't seen this same kind of hysterical panic in those cases. There's a lot driving this, and most of it's the fear of what could happen rather than what actually is happening. And again, I think as we're starting to hear from some folks, take a deep breath, look at reality, don't let your fear and the panic drive you, And on the business side, I think that's true whether it's from the consumers or whether it's businesses that are shutting down in anticipation of what may occur. Now, look, I'm always going to be in favor of tax cuts. I think if we can put payroll tax cuts in place, give a boost to the middle class, particularly as we're seeing these short-term economic disruptions take place, that's a good thing. But it should not, as you point out, become the standard, because next fall, when we hit the flu season again, are we going to do the same thing when we've got the regular flu and maybe a dose of coronavirus hitting? Are we going to do the same thing then? This should not be the precedent.
Well, and I look at other countries around the world. Have you found where other countries are stepping in and saying, you know what, we're going to go on in preparation, go in and help companies out and help those people that are getting sick? Or is the United States actually one of the only countries that I have found being proactive, saying, okay, let's get at this from a helping the economic standpoint as well, that the toll it might take on Main Street USA?
Well, I think President Trump, Secretary Mnuchin and others recognize that the fundamentals in the economy are very strong, and that what we've seen in the stock market this week, what we're seeing in terms of the business disruption, is an overreaction to the reality of what our economy is really doing. That said, consumers are the ones that are going to be first affected by these disruptions, by not being at work for a while, possibly being laid off. And I think the proactive way, as you mentioned, of getting ahead of it is something that we're taking the lead on here in this country. It makes some sense. And if we can keep that consumer base bolstered up, then when the economy rebounds, as it probably will in the next month or so, we're going to see it come back strong with a greater consumer confidence if they've had money in their pocket during this crisis.
Well, and then also I would like to find the employer right now that would say, hey, you employee that think you might have been exposed to coronavirus and are coughing, please come on in and infect the rest of my workplace. I mean, it doesn't even make dollars and cents sense, much less a kind thing for human beings to actually stay at home and stay sick. If we want to contain this virus...
There's a lot of things that don't make sense. I just saw a hospital put out the word that if you think you have coronavirus, don't go see a doctor. That seems kind of inconsistent. If it's that bad, shouldn't you seek medical advice? Again, there's a lot of stuff that's out there that makes no sense right now, and including buying 50 rolls of toilet paper.
Yeah, I still can't figure out how this type of, the fact of getting sick has this worldwide phenomenon that, if anything, has only emptied out the paper aisle there at our local grocery store. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Scotty.